The courthouse stood like a monument of power and authority, its marble steps gleaming under the morning sun, and inside, everything was designed to impress and intimidate. Tall wooden doors opened into a grand hall, the walls lined with portraits of past judges whose stern faces seemed to watch over every visitor. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and old books, a mixture that immediately made anyone feel the weight of tradition and seriousness. People hurried through the hallways, the sound of clicking heels and whispered conversations filling the space. There was a certain tension that seemed to hang in the air, a feeling that anything happening here carried more importance than outside, on the busy streets of the city. In the middle of this imposing courthouse sat the courtroom, larger than most could imagine. High ceilings arched above, decorated with intricate carvings that caught the light streaming through the tall windows. Sunlight spilled across the polished wooden benches, illuminating the rows of seats where lawyers, journalists, and onlookers gathered. At the front of the room, the judge's bench towered over everyone else. It was made of dark oak, carved with symbols of justice, authority, and power. Behind it, the judge's chair was slightly elevated, almost like a throne, emphasizing the control and dominance of the person who sat there. This was not just a room for legal proceedings, it was a stage, and the people who entered it felt the invisible pressure to perform, to follow the rules, and to behave with absolute respect. The judge in question was well known throughout the city, not only for his wealth but for his commanding presence. He had a reputation for being strict, intimidating, and often impatient with anyone he considered beneath his standards. People often described him as someone who enjoyed his power a little too much, someone who liked to remind others of his position whenever he could. His robes were always perfectly pressed, his hair impeccably styled, and his gaze could silence a room without a word. He had built an image over the years, the wealthy, untouchable figure who could make or break reputations with a single sentence. And today, he was about to confront someone he thought would be easy to humiliate. The young woman he would encounter that day had arrived quietly, almost unnoticed at first. She was dressed simply but neatly, her posture confident yet humble. Unlike the others in the room, she did not carry an air of intimidation or arrogance. There was no hint of fear or anxiety in her eyes, but neither was there any sign that she would challenge authority. She seemed calm, composed, and respectful, blending into the background while everyone else prepared for the judge's entrance. Little did anyone know that her quiet presence would soon turn into the focal point of the day's events. As the courtroom slowly filled with spectators, a subtle energy began to build. Lawyers whispered strategies to each other, journalists shuffled papers and adjusted cameras, and visitors shifted in their seats, trying to catch glimpses of the main actors of the day. There was a sense that something interesting might unfold, though no one could predict exactly what. The room held a delicate balance between routine and drama, and everyone could feel it, even if only subconsciously. Then, with a quiet authority, the judge entered. The room fell silent immediately, the chatter stopping mid-sentence. He moved with confidence, his steps measured and deliberate, as if announcing to everyone that he was in complete control. His eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail, the lawyers preparing their cases, the journalists ready with their pens and cameras, and finally, the young woman who had caught his attention. There was a faint smile on his face, one that suggested he already believed he had the upper hand. He enjoyed the power of attention, and today, he was ready to exercise it fully. As he took his seat at the bench, the judge's presence seemed to make the room shrink slightly. Everyone instinctively straightened in their chairs, aware of the unspoken hierarchy. The young woman looked up at him, her gaze steady, not intimidated but aware of the challenge ahead. A subtle tension hung in the air, almost like electricity, signaling that this was not going to be an ordinary courtroom interaction. Something about the way he looked at her suggested that he had decided she would be the subject of his authority, a person he could control with his words, gestures, and status. What made the moment even more compelling was the contrast between the two. On one side, the judge embodied wealth, power, and experience. On the other, the woman carried intelligence, courage, and composure. At that moment, it seemed like a clash was inevitable, though no one in the room yet knew how it would unfold. The stage was set, the characters were in place, and the audience, both present and later, those who would hear about it, was ready for a story that would become unforgettable. In this atmosphere, every movement, every glance, and every word held weight. The courtroom was no longer just a place for legal matters, it had transformed into a stage where human pride, wit, and dignity would collide. The tension was subtle yet palpable, like the calm before a storm. Everyone could sense that this day would be remembered, not for the case at hand, but for the unexpected confrontation that was about to begin, a moment that would show how courage and intelligence could shine even in the most intimidating settings. The judge sat back slightly in his high-backed chair, the polished wood beneath him reflecting his authority like a mirror. His eyes lingered on the young woman who had quietly taken her seat among the others, and in that instant, a thought crossed his mind, a thought that filled him with an odd mixture of amusement and superiority. He decided that today, he would remind everyone, and especially her, of exactly who held the power in this room. After all, wealth, status, and experience were things he had spent years building, and he had no intention of letting anyone challenge them. He had seen this before, a confident young person walking into a courtroom, believing that their intelligence or charm could somehow balance the scales against his authority. The judge found it almost humorous, a subtle smile playing on his lips as he imagined the look of confusion and embarrassment that would soon cross her face. It was not just about the case or the rules, it was about reminding her, and perhaps everyone else watching, that he was untouchable. A man of his position didn't need to raise his voice or act harshly. Every movement, every glance, every word carried weight, and he intended to use it fully. As the court clerk began reading the case details, the judge's mind drifted slightly, his attention fixed entirely on her. There was something in the way she carried herself, the quiet composure that suggested intelligence, that made her stand out from the others, and that, paradoxically, made the challenge even more appealing to him. He decided that words alone would not be enough. He needed a tactic that would leave her visibly unsettled, a strategy that would underline the divide between their worlds, his of wealth, power, and control, hers of relative inexperience, or so he assumed. Suddenly, an idea came to him, one that made him lean forward slightly, his fingers lightly tapping the bench, almost like a musician testing the keys before a performance. He would switch to a foreign language, one he knew she was unlikely to understand fluently, perhaps even a language he had studied briefly but mastered well enough to sound authoritative. He imagined the subtle panic, the hesitation, the momentary confusion that would flash across her face, and it gave him a strange sense of satisfaction, as though he were setting the pieces of a game in motion. The plan was simple yet precise, almost elegant in its cruelty. He would make a comment or ask a question in the foreign language, speaking slowly, carefully, emphasizing each word, just enough so that everyone in the courtroom would notice. The goal was not to confuse the entire audience but to isolate her, to make her feel the weight of his intellect and experience, to assert dominance without raising his voice. He believed that the subtlety of the approach would make it even more humiliating. A quiet power play that only those paying attention could fully appreciate. As he prepared to execute his plan, he adjusted his robes slightly, the movement deliberate, almost theatrical. It was a small gesture, but one that reinforced his presence, a silent reminder that he was in command of every inch of the room. Even the way he held the pen in his hand, poised over the case notes, was a statement of control. Every detail mattered, and he took care to ensure that it all worked together seamlessly. Meanwhile, the young woman continued to sit quietly, unaware of the mental chess game unfolding just a few feet away. Her calm demeanor, her composed posture, and the faint glimmer of curiosity in her eyes suggested that she had not yet sensed the subtle tension building. The judge, however, saw it all, the slight glance, the small smile that hinted at confidence, and he knew that if he played his cards correctly, the outcome would be memorable, not just for him but for the entire courtroom. He thrived on moments like this, where power, wit, and performance collided. With a deep breath, he decided it was time. The words were already forming in his mind, phrases carefully chosen in the foreign language to convey authority and sophistication. He would deliver them with precision, with a calm confidence that left no room for doubt. His intention was clear, to humiliate her, to remind her of her place, and to assert that in his courtroom, in his presence, he was untouchable. Little did he know, however, that the very moment he spoke, he was about to encounter a response that would completely overturn his carefully constructed plan, a reply that would shift the balance in ways he could never anticipate. The young woman's eyes flickered briefly toward the judge as he began speaking in the foreign language, her expression calm and unreadable, as if she were hearing nothing more than a gentle hum in the background. To anyone else in the room, it might have seemed like confusion, or perhaps a quiet resignation, but the truth was far different. She was listening carefully, picking up the rhythm, the tone, and the subtle hints in his words. Every gesture, every slight inflection, every pause mattered, and she noticed them all. The courtroom held its collective breath, sensing the unusual tension that had suddenly shifted, though no one could yet see the full picture. At first, the judge thought her silence meant fear or ignorance, a perfect confirmation of his plan. He leaned slightly forward, a subtle smirk forming on his lips, believing he had already won. He could see the faint tightening of her hands on her notebook and assumed it was evidence of nervousness. But what he did not realize was that her calm exterior was only a mask, one that concealed an acute awareness and an analytical mind. She was calculating, processing, and preparing her response. With precision, a response that would not only protect her dignity but challenge his authority in a way he could not have predicted. While the room buzzed softly with whispers and the shuffling of papers, she did not flinch, did not falter. Her breathing remained steady, her posture unwavering, and her gaze locked on the judge, not with fear but with quiet confidence. She understood immediately what he was trying to do: isolate her, make her feel small, and expose any hint of weakness. But she also understood something the judge had underestimated completely. Power could be met not with fear, but with composure and wit. The more he tried to intimidate, the more she prepared to respond in a way that would turn the situation on its head. As the judge continued, speaking slowly and deliberately in his chosen foreign language, she began to pick out familiar words, phrases that revealed meaning even if she did not know every single term. It was enough for her to grasp the intent behind his words, the subtle condescension, the assumed superiority, every part of his tone, from the careful enunciation to the almost imperceptible tilt of his head, told her that he expected humiliation, yet she remained unshaken. Her calmness was not ignorance, it was strategy, a quiet storm waiting to strike. The audience in the courtroom began to sense the tension, too, though few understood why. Lawyers shifted slightly in their seats, journalists leaned forward, pens hovering over notepads, and even some spectators unconsciously straightened, drawn into the unspoken duel unfolding before them. It was a rare scene, authority being exercised, challenged, and quietly questioned, all without a single word yet spoken in response. The woman's stillness was magnetic, commanding attention in a way the judge had not anticipated. Inside her mind, she prepared her reply carefully, weighing each word, considering its impact, and choosing the perfect tone. Her goal was not to escalate, nor to embarrass him outright, but to assert herself in a way that was sharp, precise, and impossible to ignore. She understood that wit and clarity often carried far more weight than anger or confrontation, and she intended to demonstrate exactly that. Every second she waited, the suspense grew, her silent confidence creating a tension that made even the judge slightly uneasy, though he would never admit it aloud. Then, in that critical moment, she smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, a smile that conveyed calmness, intelligence, and readiness. It was subtle but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. The judge's expression, once smug and self-assured, flickered with a hint of uncertainty, a tiny crack in the armor of his superiority. The young woman's reaction was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that confidence could shine even in the shadow of wealth and authority, and that dignity often outlasts intimidation. By the time she opened her mouth, the courtroom had leaned in without realizing it, sensing that something remarkable was about to happen. Her first words, measured and deliberate, carried the weight of thought and courage. She spoke not with anger, but with precision, her tone calm yet commanding, the kind of tone that instantly shifts the balance in any interaction. The judge, who had assumed he held the upper hand, finally realized that this encounter was no longer under his control. The young woman had not only resisted humiliation, she had prepared to challenge it in the most unforgettable way. The courtroom held its breath. Every eye in the room turned toward the young woman, waiting for her response. The judge, who had been so confident moments ago, leaned forward slightly, expecting hesitation, expecting confusion, expecting that perfect, humiliating pause that would confirm his superiority. Instead, what he saw was a calm, steady gaze, clear and unwavering, as though she were not just listening but already several steps ahead in her mind. The smirk that had lingered on his face began to falter ever so slightly, replaced by a flicker of curiosity and, just for an instant, unease. Then she spoke. Her words were precise, deliberate, and in perfect comprehension of the foreign language the judge had used. Each syllable carried clarity, intelligence, and a subtle firmness that immediately shifted the energy in the room. What could have been a stammer, a pause, or a moment of embarrassment instead became a display of wit and self-assurance, a reminder that authority is not always determined by wealth or title. The judge's carefully constructed plan, meant to isolate and humiliate, was unraveling in front of him. Her reply was polite, but the message was unmistakable. She had not only understood him, she had turned the situation back on its head. Her words demonstrated not only comprehension but also confidence, subtly highlighting the arrogance of his attempt to intimidate her. The courtroom, which had been tense and anticipatory, now vibrated with a mix of surprise and admiration. Lawyers leaned forward, journalists paused mid-note, and spectators exchanged glances that betrayed their astonishment. No one had expected this. The judge tried to mask his reaction with a forced smile, but it was too late. The precision and calmness of her response had already undone the invisible walls of superiority he had erected. The subtle power shift was undeniable. The young woman's reply had achieved exactly what she intended. It commanded respect without confrontation, intelligence without arrogance, and courage without aggression. She had transformed what was meant to be a moment of humiliation into a demonstration of poise and quick thinking. Even the way she spoke carried weight. Her tone was calm but assertive, her voice clear and measured, giving every word an authority that matched, and in some ways exceeded, that of the judge. She didn't need to raise her voice, make threats, or insult him. Her words alone, delivered with confidence and clarity, were enough to challenge his dominance. The courtroom recognized this instantly, sensing that the balance of power had shifted dramatically in an instant. For the judge, the experience was jarring. He had relied on his status, his wealth, and the expectation of obedience to control the situation, but now he faced something he hadn't accounted for, true composure and intellect standing firmly against him. His plans of humiliation were crumbling, replaced by an unfamiliar feeling of vulnerability. Even the most seasoned and confident individuals can feel unprepared when confronted by someone who refuses to be intimidated, and in that moment, he understood it. The spectators, initially silent, now began to react. A few gasps rippled through the room, followed by soft murmurs of admiration. The young woman's courage and intelligence were impossible to ignore. It was a rare moment when respect was earned in real time, not demanded through power or authority. People in the courtroom instinctively recognized the lesson unfolding before them, that true strength is often quiet, and confidence is not loud but unwavering. The judge's attempt to humiliate had not just failed, it had highlighted his miscalculation. He had assumed that wealth, status, and the command of a language could overpower intellect and composure. Yet here she was, standing firm, demonstrating that a single act of courage and cleverness could completely alter the dynamics of power. The courtroom, which had initially been his stage, had now become her platform. As she concluded her response, a sense of awe filled the room. The judge, momentarily stunned, tried to regain his composure, but the momentum had shifted irrevocably. Every person present had witnessed the unexpected reversal, a moment that would linger in memory far longer than any routine legal proceeding. What was meant to be a display of dominance had instead become a testament to wit, courage, and the unexpected power of calm intelligence in the face of intimidation. And in that precise instant, the young woman's reply did more than just answer a question or respond to an insult. It redefined the interaction entirely. The lesson was clear to everyone present: authority may demand attention, but respect is earned through courage, clarity, and the ability to stand firm when challenged. The judge had underestimated her, and the courtroom, and the world, would not soon forget it. The courtroom seemed to pause for a moment, as if time itself had frozen in recognition of what had just happened. The young woman's reply hung in the air, clear, confident, and undeniable, leaving the judge momentarily speechless. His carefully crafted plan to humiliate her had completely unraveled, and the audience felt it. Even before anyone spoke a word, a low murmur began to ripple through the room, growing louder as people processed what they had just witnessed. The atmosphere, once heavy with tension and expectation, now shimmered with surprise, admiration, and a touch of disbelief. Lawyers who had been preparing their notes and shuffling papers stopped mid-motion, their pens hovering over notebooks. Their eyes darted between the judge and the young woman, trying to understand what had just occurred. Some exchanged quick, whispered remarks, nodding subtly in approval of her composure and intellect, while others simply shook their heads, astonished at how one person had shifted the balance of authority so completely. It was a rare moment where respect was earned not through fear or title, but through courage and wit. The judge, for his part, struggled to regain the control he had taken for granted. His hands gripped the edge of the bench, knuckles whitening as he attempted to project authority despite the inner shock. Every muscle in his face worked to recreate the smug confidence he had felt moments before, but the subtle tension in his eyes betrayed him. The courtroom had witnessed the unexpected, a reversal of power that no one, least of all him, had anticipated, and it left him momentarily vulnerable. Stripped of the quiet superiority he had relied upon. Spectators in the room could not contain their astonishment. Journalists lowered their pens, cameras paused mid-frame, and even some of the most seasoned court officers exchanged glances of disbelief. Their murmurs grew into soft whispers that spread across the benches like wildfire. Everyone felt it, the shift from expectation to surprise, from control to unpredictability. A young woman, quiet and unassuming, had turned the tables with nothing more than calm intelligence and precise words, and the room had collectively witnessed it. Some of the onlookers began to smile subtly, recognizing a rare display of courage and quick thinking. Many had seen courtroom confrontations before, but nothing quite like this. This was not a shouting match or a heated argument. It was a quiet, intelligent victory that left an entire room reconsidering assumptions about power, status, and authority. People leaned forward instinctively, drawn into the human drama unfolding before them, realizing that the story was no longer about the case itself but about the dynamics of respect, wit, and courage. Even the lawyers who had come to the courtroom prepared for procedural work felt a pang of admiration. They had trained to argue cases, anticipate objections, and present evidence, but what they had just seen was beyond any textbook lesson. It was a reminder that intelligence and courage often leave a far deeper impression than wealth or authority, and that confidence can turn even the most intimidating situations into moments of triumph. The young woman, still calm and composed, did not seem to notice the ripple of astonishment she had created. Her eyes remained focused, her posture steady, and her expression confident, as if she had expected nothing less from herself. Yet the effect on the courtroom was undeniable. She had transformed a room full of people who had come to witness authority into witnesses of her quiet strength, forcing everyone to reconsider what it means to be powerful. The judge, finally finding his voice, tried to continue with the proceedings, but the momentum had shifted irreversibly. His words now sounded measured, cautious, even slightly defensive, as he realized that the courtroom no longer responded solely to his authority. It responded to hers, to her courage, her composure, and the clarity of her intellect. The courtroom had witnessed a lesson that no one would soon forget, a demonstration that true respect is earned through dignity and presence of mind, not intimidation or wealth. By the end of that moment, the courtroom had become a theater of human reaction, full of whispers, glances, and subtle nods of admiration. The young woman had not only defended herself, she had changed the energy of the room, creating an unforgettable scene that proved the power of intelligence, courage, and calm confidence. In a place built for authority, she had reminded everyone present, and those who would later hear the story, that the unexpected strength of a single person can eclipse even the weightiest titles and the loudest displays of power. The judge sat in his elevated chair, his hands still resting on the polished oak of the bench, but the confident authority he had carried into the room now felt fragile, almost brittle. The calm, precise words of the young woman replayed in his mind like a song stuck on a loop, each syllable reminding him that his plan to humiliate her had failed spectacularly. His carefully cultivated aura of control had been shaken, and for the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. He tried to compose himself, straightening his robes and adjusting his chair as if these small gestures could restore his dominance, but every time he looked at her calm, unwavering expression, the smirk he had relied upon seemed forced, almost hollow. His eyes flickered as he struggled to process the reversal. He had expected hesitation, confusion, or maybe embarrassment, but not the quiet, sharp intelligence she had displayed. It was not just a response, it was a reminder that he was no longer the sole holder of authority in the room. The audience could feel the subtle tension emanating from him, even if most could not fully understand the internal struggle he faced. There was a moment, almost imperceptible, when he hesitated, searching for words that would regain his footing, words that would reassert control, but the usual tools he had relied on, intimidation, wealth, status, suddenly felt ineffective. His voice, when it finally emerged, carried a careful neutrality, lacking the sharp edge he had intended to wield. Inside, he wrestled with a mixture of emotions, frustration, disbelief, and a grudging respect. The young woman had turned a moment meant for humiliation into a display of strength and intellect, forcing him to confront an uncomfortable truth. Authority alone does not guarantee respect, nor does wealth ensure unquestioned dominance. Every phrase she had delivered was measured, deliberate, and impossible to counter without sounding petty or defensive, and that realization gnawed at him more than any verbal defeat ever could. He briefly glanced around the courtroom, observing the reactions of the audience, and it struck him that they had noticed too. The murmurs, the subtle nods of approval, the quiet admiration, all confirmed what he had feared. The balance of perception had shifted. The judge, accustomed to commanding attention and obedience with ease, now had to contend with the undeniable fact that his influence was not absolute. That intelligence, composure, and courage could, in a single moment, redirect the focus of every observer. He took a deep breath, attempting to regain composure, but the moment had passed beyond his control. The courtroom was no longer merely his stage, it had become a witness to her strength, and every action he attempted now had to account for the subtle power she had claimed. For the first time, he felt the weight of scrutiny not as a symbol of authority, but as a reflection of challenge. His reputation, meticulously built over decades, had just been confronted by someone whose confidence and intellect could not be intimidated. Despite the inner turmoil, he forced a smile, the kind of polite mask one wears in social settings when faced with an unexpected turn, but it did little to hide the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The calm demeanor of the young woman made his usual tactics feel obsolete, and even his attempts to redirect the proceedings carried a caution that had not been there moments before. The courtroom, once silent out of deference, now watched him with a new awareness, sensing the subtle shift in the dynamics of power. It was not humiliation he felt, exactly, but a lesson, sharp and unavoidable, that authority without respect is fragile, and that true strength often comes from wit, courage, and the quiet confidence to stand firm. The judge realized that this young woman had not simply responded, she had rewritten the rules of engagement in this room, showing that dominance is not always inherited from title or wealth, but earned through presence and intelligence. As he continued the proceedings, the judge did so with a newfound caution, a subtle humility that had not existed before. He could feel, with every glance and gesture, that the courtroom's perception of him had shifted slightly, that the awe and tension he had relied on were now tempered by admiration for her. It was a moment that would linger in his mind, a reminder that underestimation is a dangerous error, and that respect, once earned by one person, can change the entire room in an instant. And in that moment, the judge understood something crucial. This young woman had not only defended herself, she had transformed a courtroom of observers into witnesses of true courage, leaving him with a rare, humbling awareness of the power of intellect, composure, and dignity. The courtroom had emptied, but the echoes of what had happened lingered in the minds of everyone present. The story of the young woman's calm, sharp, and unforgettable reply had already begun to take on a life of its own, spreading through whispers, conversations, and the quiet admiration of those who had witnessed it firsthand. Even as people returned to their offices, homes, or daily routines, the memory of her courage remained vivid, a small spark of inspiration that refused to fade. By the next day, the story had gone beyond the walls of the courthouse. Lawyers and journalists shared the account in hushed tones, emphasizing the audacity, intelligence, and composure of the young woman. Social media began to light up with retellings, some praising her wit, others marveling at her courage, and a few even mocking the judge's failed attempt at humiliation. The story was transforming into something larger than the courtroom itself. A viral sensation that captured attention far beyond those who had been physically present. People were drawn to it not just because of the drama, but because it was relatable. Many had experienced moments of intimidation, whether from authority figures, peers, or society itself, and the woman's response became a symbol of what courage and intelligence could accomplish. Her reply showed that even in situations designed to assert dominance and power, dignity, wit, and self-assurance could turn the tables, inspiring countless conversations about confidence, respect, and fairness. The judge's reputation, while still formidable, was subtly impacted by the event. Though many continued to respect his position and authority, there was a newfound awareness of his vulnerability. A small but significant shift had occurred. The courtroom, and by extension the public, had seen that even the most powerful figures could be challenged, and that underestimation of others could lead to unforeseen outcomes. The young woman, on the other hand, became an unexpected hero to many. Though she had not sought attention or fame, her composure and quick thinking resonated widely. Her story appeared in news articles, social media posts, and even discussion forums dedicated to real-life moments of courage. People admired not only her words but the way she carried herself, calm yet confident, proving that respect is earned through presence and intellect, not just authority or wealth. In workplaces, schools, and online communities, people began referencing the incident as an example of standing firm under pressure, of responding thoughtfully rather than reacting impulsively. The lesson was simple but profound. True strength does not always roar. Sometimes it is quiet, measured, and deliberate, and it leaves a far stronger impression than force or intimidation ever could. The story spread as a reminder that intelligence, courage, and dignity can shift dynamics in ways that are impossible to ignore. Even the judge, upon reflection, could not deny the impact of what had occurred. In private moments, he acknowledged the lesson the young woman had imparted, that authority alone is not enough to command respect, and that humility, awareness, and adaptability are critical qualities for anyone in a position of power. It was a humbling realization, one that lingered in his mind far longer than the moment of embarrassment ever would. As the tale continued to spread, it became more than a story of a courtroom interaction. It became a narrative about human potential, resilience, and the unexpected ways people can assert themselves. People began sharing it as motivation, inspiration, and even a teaching tool, reminding others that standing firm with intelligence and composure can change outcomes and perceptions dramatically. The aftermath was not loud or chaotic. It was subtle, yet profound. It reshaped the way people thought about power, respect, and courage, creating ripples that extended far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Every retelling emphasized the same truth. Sometimes, the most powerful moments are not those that come from dominance, wealth, or intimidation, but those that emerge from quiet strength, quick thinking, and the courage to respond when least expected. By the time the story had fully reached the public, the courtroom incident had become more than a personal victory for the young woman. It had become a lesson for anyone who had ever felt underestimated, intimidated, or overlooked. A single reply, calm, confident, and precise, had inspired countless people to believe in their own ability to stand tall, even when facing overwhelming authority. The ripple effects of her courage continued to spread, long after the echoes of that day had faded from the physical courtroom. As the echoes of that unforgettable courtroom encounter spread far and wide, people began to reflect not just on the moment itself, but on the deeper lessons it offered. The young woman's calm, intelligent, and confident reply had become more than a reaction. It had become a symbol of courage, dignity, and the power of presence. Her story reminded everyone that true strength is not measured by wealth, status, or authority, but by how one handles pressure, adversity, and the unexpected. In the days and weeks following the incident, discussions emerged everywhere, from coffee shops to classrooms, from online forums to professional boardrooms, about what had truly happened that day. People marveled at her ability to remain composed under scrutiny, to assess the situation, and to respond in a way that was both firm and respectful. It was a reminder that sometimes, the most powerful action is not to overpower others, but to stand calmly, think clearly, and assert oneself with intelligence and dignity. The judge, too, spent time reflecting on the encounter, and for the first time, he confronted an uncomfortable truth. Authority alone does not guarantee respect. the young woman had challenged him not through confrontation or disrespect, but through poise and understanding, showing that confidence paired with clarity can be far more impactful than intimidation. He realized that in positions of power, humility, empathy, and awareness are as critical as knowledge and experience. A single act of wisdom had taught him a lesson that no formal training or status could have conveyed. Beyond the courtroom, her story resonated deeply with those who had ever felt belittled, overlooked, or underestimated. People began to share their own experiences, inspired by her example, recognizing that confidence and preparation could transform moments of intimidation into opportunities for dignity. The narrative became a blueprint for courage in everyday life, proving that even ordinary individuals can create extraordinary impact when they remain composed and think critically under pressure. The incident also highlighted the human tendency to misjudge others based on appearances or assumptions. The judge had assumed that wealth, position, and command of a foreign language would secure him unquestioned dominance, yet all it took was one confident, measured response to shift the balance. The lesson extended beyond the courtroom. Underestimating anyone, regardless of perceived inexperience or position, can lead to unexpected outcomes. Intelligence and courage are not always visible, but their impact can be immediate and profound. For many, the young woman's reply became a source of empowerment, a reminder that standing firm in the face of intimidation is a skill that can be learned, practiced, and applied in countless situations. From workplace challenges to personal conflicts, her example illustrated that the combination of composure, wit, and clarity can dismantle attempts at control or humiliation. It encouraged people to value their own voice, trust their judgment, and approach difficult moments with confidence, rather than fear. The courtroom, once a place of tension and hierarchy, had become a stage for an important life lesson, one that transcended the individuals involved and reached anyone willing to pay attention. The story emphasized that respect cannot be demanded, only earned, and that true authority is reflected not in titles or wealth, but in character, composure, and the ability to respond thoughtfully under pressure. It reminded everyone that intelligence and courage, when paired with calmness and self-assurance, can alter not just outcomes but perceptions as well. In the end, the young woman's moment of brilliance was a quiet revolution, a testament to the strength that lies in dignity, presence of mind, and resilience. It showed that even against the most imposing figures, individuals can assert themselves with grace and effectiveness, leaving an impact that is remembered long after the moment has passed. Her reply became more than words. It became a symbol of empowerment, inspiring countless people to approach challenges with courage, clarity, and quiet confidence. And as the story continued to circulate, inspiring reflection, conversation, and admiration, it became clear that the most lasting lesson of all was this: wealth, position, and authority may influence perception, but true strength comes from intelligence, courage, and the ability to stand firm with dignity. In every corner of life, those who remain composed, thoughtful, and confident can transform even the most intimidating encounters into opportunities for respect and empowerment.